Do you remember that scene 25 years ago when 6-year-old little Cindy Lou, whose life was forever changed? That look in Jim Carrey's eyes, those words he said to little Taylor Momsen. Now that little girl has become a rock star, and when they met again, Jim Carrey's first words shocked everyone. But what happened in those first few seconds of their reunion would reveal a secret that had been buried for a quarter of a century. A secret that would explain why Taylor Momsen's life took such a dramatic turn from innocent child star to gothic rock icon. And why Jim Carrey never forgot that little girl with the bright eyes and infectious smile. Before we dive into this incredible reunion story, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming celebrity encounters that will restore your faith in Hollywood. The backstage area of The Tonight Show buzzed with typical pre-show energy. Guests moved through makeup, assistants checked schedules, and the familiar hum of television production filled the air. It was just another Tuesday night in 2024, but for two people about to cross paths, this evening would become something extraordinary. Jim Carrey sat in his dressing room, reviewing notes for his interview about his latest art exhibition. At 62, the comedy legend had embraced a more reflective phase of his career, diving deep into painting and spiritual exploration. His wild, rubber-faced antics that made him famous seemed like a different lifetime, though the spark in his eyes remained unmistakable. 3 doors down, Taylor Momsen was getting her stage makeup touched up. The 31-year-old frontwoman of The Pretty Reckless had just finished a powerful acoustic performance of her latest single. Gone was any trace of the adorable blonde curls and pink dresses from her Hoville days. In their place stood a confident woman with platinum blonde hair, dark eye makeup, and leather boots that had walked countless stages around the world. What neither of them knew was that a production assistant had made an error in the guest lineup sheet. Instead of exiting through separate corridors as planned, both celebrities were directed to the same narrow hallway that led to the parking garage. Taylor emerged first from her dressing room, guitar case slung over her shoulder, scrolling through messages on her phone. She walked with the purposeful stride of someone who had grown comfortable with fame on her own terms. The shy little girl who once stumbled over lines about Christmas spirit had evolved into a rock goddess who commanded stadiums full of screaming fans. Jim appeared at the opposite end of the hallway moments later, his signature animated gestures evident even in casual conversation with his assistant. He was discussing plans for his next art show when something made him stop mid-sentence. The voice. Even after 25 years, even deepened by age and shaped by years of powerful vocals, there was something unmistakable about Taylor's laugh as she responded to something her manager said. It was a sound that transported Jim instantly back to a soundstage in 2000, to a little girl in a pink nightgown who had looked at him with such genuine wonder that it nearly broke character. Taylor? The single word hung in the air between them. Taylor looked up from her phone, her dark-rimmed eyes scanning the hallway until they found the source of the familiar voice. For a moment, time seemed suspended. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to cover her mouth. "Jim?" They stood frozen at opposite ends of the hallway. Two people whose lives had intersected so briefly but so meaningfully that the moment had shaped both of their journeys in ways they were only beginning to understand. Jim's face broke into that famous grin, but there was something different about it now. Softer, more genuine. Less performance, more heart. "Cindy Lou Who," he said gently, and the nickname that had once made her giggle now brought tears to her eyes. Taylor sat down her guitar case and took a tentative step forward. Then another. Jim did the same until they were close enough to see how much they had both changed. And yet how much they had remained exactly the same. "You grew up," Jim said, his voice carrying a mixture of wonder and something that sounded almost like pride. "You haven't aged a day," Taylor replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. Lines had appeared around Jim's eyes, gray had touched his temples, and life had left its marks. But there was something timeless about the way he looked at her. The same gentle attention he had given to a nervous 6-year-old on her first major movie set. What happened next would surprise everyone who witnessed it, including the security camera that captured every second of their reunion. Jim Carrey, the master of physical comedy who had spent decades making millions laugh, began to cry, not the theatrical tears of a performance, but the genuine emotion of a man who had carried a memory for 25 years and never, expected to have the chance to share what it had meant to him. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Something I should have said a long time ago." Taylor stepped closer, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm in a gesture of comfort that showed how much she had matured from the little girl who used to need reassurance herself. "What is it?" she asked softly. Jim took a deep breath, gathering the courage to share something he had never told anyone. Not his agents, not his closest friends, not even his therapist during the darkest periods of his career. "That day on set," he began, "when we filmed your last scene, you remember the one where Cindy Lou who tells the Grinch that Christmas isn't about presents?" Taylor nodded, though in truth, most of that filming experience existed in her memory as a series of disconnected moments and emotions rather than clear recollections. "You had been struggling with the dialogue all morning," Jim continued. "It was a big speech for such a little kid, and you kept getting frustrated with yourself. You were so hard on yourself, just 6 years old, and already putting this incredible pressure on your shoulders to be perfect." The memory was coming back to Taylor now, vague but emotionally resonant. She remembered feeling overwhelmed, remembered wanting to make everyone proud, but feeling like she was letting everyone down. "Between takes," Jim went on, "you came up to me and apologized. You said you were sorry for ruining everyone's day because you couldn't remember your lines. And I looked into your eyes and I saw something that broke my heart." He paused, struggling with the emotion of the memory. "You weren't just apologizing for forgetting dialogue, Taylor. You were apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for needing help, for being human. And I realized that somewhere along the way, someone had taught you that your worth was tied to your performance. That love was conditional on being perfect." Taylor's eyes were filling with tears now, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Something about Jim's words was touching a part of her that had been buried for decades. "I wanted to tell you then that you were enough. That you were more than enough. That your spirit and your kindness and your curiosity were worth more than any line you could ever deliver perfectly. But you were 6, and I was just the guy in the green makeup, and I didn't think it was my place." Jim wiped his eyes, not caring that anyone might see this vulnerable moment. "But I carried that moment with me, Taylor. For 25 years, I carried the image of this beautiful little girl who thought she needed to apologize for being human. And I promised myself that if I ever saw you again, I would tell you what I should have told you then." He looked directly into her eyes, and his voice became stronger, more certain. "You are enough. You have always been enough. You were enough when you were 6 and struggling with lines, and you're enough now as an incredible artist who has found her voice and used it to touch millions of people. Your worth has nothing to do with your performance and everything to do with who you are." The hallway fell completely silent except for the distant sounds of the television studio continuing its work. Taylor stood frozen, processing words that her 6-year-old self had desperately needed to hear, and that her adult self hadn't realized she still needed. But Jim wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Something I've never told anyone." Taylor waited, sensing that whatever came next would be even more significant than what he had already shared. "After we wrapped filming, I went home that night and wrote you a letter. A long letter about potential and dreams and the importance of staying true to yourself even when the world tries to change you. I was going to give it to you on the last day of shooting." "What happened to it?" Taylor asked, her voice barely audible. Jim smiled sadly. "I chickened out. I convinced myself it would be inappropriate, that your parents might misunderstand, that it wasn't my place to give life advice to someone else's child. So I kept it." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope, yellowed with age and handled countless times. "I've carried it with me for 25 years, Taylor. Through every move, every relationship, every career change. I couldn't throw it away, but I never had the courage to send it." Taylor stared at the envelope as if it contained secrets to the universe. "May I?" Jim asked, gesturing toward the letter. Taylor nodded. Not trusting her voice, Jim carefully opened the envelope and pulled out several pages of handwritten text. His handwriting from 2000 was more careful, more deliberate than his usual scrawl. "Dear Taylor," he began to read. "By the time you read this, our time working together on The Grinch will be finished. I wanted to write you this letter because I see something special in you, something that goes far beyond acting or performing. As Jim read, Taylor noticed that other people in the hallway had stopped to listen. Production assistants, makeup artists, even a few executives had gathered at a respectful distance, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. I see a little girl who asks thoughtful questions about everything around her, who remembers everyone's name on set from the biggest stars to the craft services workers, who offers to help even when no one asks, who lights up when she talks about books and music and all the things she wants to learn. Taylor's tears were flowing freely now, and she made no attempt to stop them. The world is going to try to put you in boxes, Taylor. They're going to want to define you by this role, or by being young, or by being pretty, or by any number of limitations that have nothing to do with who you really are. Don't let them. Jim's voice was growing stronger as he read, as if the act of finally sharing these words was healing something in him as well. You have a light inside you that is uniquely yours. It doesn't matter if you become an actor or a teacher or a scientist or anything else your heart calls you to be. What matters is that you never let anyone convince you to dim that light to make others more comfortable. The letter continued for several more paragraphs, filled with encouragement, wisdom, and the kind of genuine care that transcended the typical relationship between adult and child. Actors on a film set. When Jim finished reading, he carefully folded the letter and held it out to Taylor. "This belongs to you," he said simply. "It always has." Taylor took the letter with trembling hands, clutching it against her chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Jim," she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by everything she wanted to say. "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "I just needed you to know that someone saw you, really saw you, and believed in who you could become." But Taylor shook her head. "No, I do need to say something. Something I've never told anyone." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I've spent most of my adult life trying to understand why I walked away from traditional acting. Why I picked up a guitar and started screaming into microphones instead of memorizing lines for family-friendly movies. Why I felt like I had to completely transform myself to feel authentic." Jim listened intently, sensing the importance of what she was sharing. "I've been in therapy for years, trying to figure out where this need for rebellion came from. Why I felt like I had to reject everything about my childhood career to find my real voice. And therapists would ask about negative experiences, about people who made me feel bad about myself or my work." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But that's not what shaped me. What shaped me was the opposite. It was you." Jim looked confused, worried that somehow his memory of their interaction had been different from hers. "On that set, you treated me like a real person. Not a cute kid doing a job, not a miniature adult, not a commodity in a business transaction. You talked to me like my thoughts mattered. You listened when I had ideas. You made me feel like I was worth taking seriously." Taylor's voice was growing stronger as she spoke. "And that feeling, Jim, that feeling of being seen and valued for who I really was, it ruined me for everything fake. It made it impossible for me to be satisfied with just being what other people wanted me to be. Because you showed me what it felt like to be authentic, even when I was too young to have words for it." Jim's eyes widened as he began to understand what she was saying. "Every time someone tried to put me in a box after that, I remembered how it felt to be around you. How it felt to be encouraged to ask questions and be curious and take up space. So when the acting roles started feeling fake, when the industry started feeling like it was trying to make me into someone I wasn't, I rebelled. Not because I had a bad experience, but because I had such a good one that I knew the difference." She laughed through her tears, a sound that was both joyful and heartbroken. "My music, my band, even this look. It's not rebellion against something bad. It's rebellion towards something real. It's me trying to get back to that feeling I had on set with you, when I knew that being myself was not only okay but actually better than trying to be perfect." The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the hallway seemed to understand they were witnessing something sacred. A healing that had been 25 years in the making. Jim reached out and gently squeezed Taylor's shoulder. "I had no idea," he whispered. "I never imagined... How could you have known?" Taylor replied, "I barely understood it myself until right now." They stood together for a long moment. Two artists separated by decades and vastly different career paths. United by a connection that had shaped both their lives in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. Finally, Jim spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" Taylor nodded. Asterisk, asterisk, are you happy? With your music, your life, the choices you've made? Taylor considered the question seriously before answering. "I'm authentic," she said. "Which is different from happy, but it's what I needed to be. My music comes from a real place. My relationships are honest. I don't have to pretend to be someone else to earn love or approval. That's worth more to me than happiness." Jim smiled, and for the first time in the entire conversation, it was purely joyful. "That's the most beautiful thing I've heard in years," he said. What happened next would be talked about for weeks in Hollywood circles and beyond. Word of their reunion would spread through social media, inspiring thousands of people to reach out to childhood influences who had made a difference in their lives. But in that moment, in a narrow hallway backstage at a television studio, none of that mattered. What mattered was that two people had found each other again, and in finding each other, had found missing pieces of themselves. Taylor carefully folded Jim's letter and put it in her jacket pocket. "I'm going to frame this," she said, "and read it every time I doubt myself." "You shouldn't doubt yourself," Jim replied. "But if you do, remember that there's someone who's been carrying faith in you for 25 years. As if on cue, a production assistant approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "But Mr. Carrey, you're needed on set in 5 minutes. Jim nodded, then turned back to Taylor. "I know this might sound strange," he said, "but would you mind if I hugged you? I've wanted to give that 6-year-old girl a hug for 25 years. And I think I need to give one to the amazing woman she became." Taylor didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Jim, and he held her like the proud father figure he had unknowingly become in her memories. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder, "for seeing me, for remembering, for caring enough to carry that letter all these years." "Thank you," Jim replied, "for becoming exactly who you were meant to be, even when the world tried to convince you to be someone else." When they finally separated, both were crying again. But these were tears of resolution and gratitude rather than old pain. "Will you stay in touch?" Taylor asked. "Try and stop me," Jim replied with a grin that was pure mischief and affection. As they exchanged phone numbers and made plans to have a proper conversation over dinner, neither of them noticed the small crowd that had gathered to watch their reunion. Production assistants wiped tears from their eyes. Makeup artists abandoned their brushes to watch two people heal each other with words they had needed to share for decades. Later that evening, after Jim's interview and Taylor's performance, after the cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home, they would sit in an all-night diner and talk until sunrise. They would share stories about the paths their lives had taken, the lessons they had learned, and the ways that single moment on a movie set had rippled through the decades. Taylor would learn that Jim had gone through his own periods of doubt and reinvention, his own struggles with authenticity in an industry that often rewarded performance over truth. She would discover that the man who had taught her to value her real self had sometimes struggled to find his own. Jim would learn about Taylor's music, her band, the way she had channeled her need for authenticity into songs that helped other people feel less alone. He would understand that his small act of kindness to a 6-year-old had not only shaped her life, but had indirectly touched the lives of everyone who had ever been moved by her music. But all of that was still to come. In the immediate aftermath of their hallway reunion, as they walked toward their separate cars in the parking garage, something beautiful had already happened. Two people had reminded each other that genuine connection transcends time. That kindness has power we rarely understand. And that sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone is simply see them for who they really are. As Taylor drove home that night, Jim's letter on the passenger seat beside her, she thought about 6-year-old Cindy Lou and the man in green makeup who had treated her like she mattered. She thought about all the choices she had made since then, all the times she had chosen authenticity over approval, truth over comfort. For the first time in years, every single choice made perfect sense. As Jim drove to his own home, his phone already lighting up with text messages from Taylor. He marveled at the way life could surprise you. He had expected their reunion to be awkward, a brief encounter between two people who shared a small piece of history. Instead, it had become one of the most meaningful conversations of his entire life. He thought about the letter he had carried for 25 years, about the weight of words unspoken and love unexpressed. He thought about all the people in his life who might need to hear that they were enough, that they were seen, that their authentic selves were worth celebrating. By the time he reached his driveway, Jim Carrey had made a decision. He was going to start writing more letters. He was going to start telling people what they meant to him while he still had the chance. The reunion of Jim Carrey and Taylor Momsen became more than just a heartwarming celebrity story. It became a reminder that the words we speak to children echo through decades, that authentic connections never truly fade, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply acknowledge the light we see in another person. In a world increasingly focused on social media connections and superficial interactions, their story reminded people of the enduring power of genuine human connection. It inspired thousands of viewers to reach out to childhood mentors, to write their own letters of gratitude, to look for opportunities to see and celebrate the authentic selves of the people around them. But perhaps most importantly, it showed that it's never too late to say the words that matter. Whether it's telling someone they're enough, expressing gratitude for their impact on your life, or simply acknowledging the unique light they bring to the world. The most important conversations are often the ones we think we've waited too long to have. In the end, the reunion of the Grinch and Cindy Lou, who became a story about the enduring power of love, recognition, and the courage to be authentically ourselves in a world that often asks us to be anything but. Taylor would learn that Jim had gone through his own periods of doubt and reinvention, his own struggles with authenticity in an industry that often rewarded performance over truth. She would discover that the man who had taught her to value her real self had sometimes struggled to find his own. Jim would learn about Taylor's music, her band, the way she had channeled her need for authenticity into songs that helped other people feel less alone. He would understand that his small act of kindness to a 6-year-old had not only shaped her life, but had indirectly touched the lives of everyone who had ever been moved by her music. But all of that was still to come. In the immediate aftermath of their hallway reunion, as they walked toward their separate cars in the parking garage, something beautiful had already happened. Two people had reminded each other that genuine connection transcends time, that kindness has power we rarely understand, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone is simply see them for who they really are. As Taylor drove home that night, Jim's letter on the passenger seat beside her, she thought about 6-year-old Cindy Lou and the man in green makeup who had treated her like she mattered. She thought about all the choices she had made since then. All the times she had chosen authenticity over approval, truth over comfort. For the first time in years, every single choice made perfect sense. As Jim drove to his own home, his phone already lighting up with text messages from Taylor, he marveled at the way life could surprise you. He had expected their reunion to be awkward, a brief encounter between two people who shared a small piece of history. Instead, it had become one of the most meaningful conversations of his entire life. He thought about the letter he had carried for 25 years, about the weight of words unspoken and love unexpressed. He thought about all the people in his life who might need to hear that they were enough, that they were seen, that their authentic selves were worth celebrating.
By the time he reached his driveway, Jim Carrey had made a decision. He was going to start writing more letters. He was going to start telling people what they meant to him while he still had the chance. The reunion of Jim Carrey and Taylor Momsen became more than just a heartwarming celebrity story. It became a reminder that the words we speak to children echo through decades, that authentic connections never truly fade, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply acknowledge the light we see in another person. In a world increasingly focused on social media connections and superficial interactions, their story reminded people of the enduring power of genuine human connection. It inspired thousands of viewers to reach out to childhood mentors, to write their own letters of gratitude, to look for opportunities to see and celebrate the authentic selves of the people around them. But perhaps most importantly, it showed that it's never too late to say the words that matter. Whether it's telling someone they're enough, expressing gratitude for their impact on your life, or simply acknowledging the unique light they bring to the world, the most important conversations are often the ones we think we've waited too long to have. In the end, the reunion of the Grinch and Cindy Lou Who became a story about the enduring power of love, recognition, and the courage to be authentically ourselves in a world that often asks us to be anything but. And somewhere in Hollywood, two people who had briefly crossed paths as strangers became lifelong friends, united by the understanding that the most important role any of us ever plays is simply being human.